am a lawyer, but I am not necessarily your lawyer. The materials discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be deemed legal advice. If you have a specific legal question according to your circumstances, then I encourage you to speak with an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. Welcome back to another edition of Ag Law Today. We've got a very special guest in the house. Welcome back to the podcast, Robert. And we're going to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is partnership agreements. And I think that this is actually the topic of conversation where we met each other for the first time at the American Ag Law Association. Isn't that right?
That's right.
Yep. Yeah. So, Robert, you introduce yourself to our listeners. Tell everybody more about you, your law practice, and your interest in agriculture law.
Okay. So I'm in private practice in Ohio in a small town called Delaware, which is just north of Columbus in central Ohio. Our practice has been around for about 30 years. I've been with it for, 17 or 18 now. And the firm was originally established by Paul Wright, who was the agricultural law specialist at Ohio State University. And Paul saw a need that farmers and landowners have some unique legal needs. So he started up a law firm that just works with almost exclusively farmers and landowners. And we've kept that going through today. We work with farmers and landowners throughout Ohio on various legal issues. Our primary areas of practice are the business entities and succession planning, estate planning, estates, those sorts of things. We get into some leases and real estate, but our bread and butter is kind of succession planning, business, and estates.
So, Robert, what specifically drew you to agriculture law? Did you grow up in production agriculture, or what drew you to that practice?
Yeah, so I grew up on a dairy farm here in Ohio. I've always been involved in agriculture. I was working at Ohio State University in the extension service and just and decided to go to law school, and I got that challenge and more than I bargained for some days, but went to law school. And I tell people I'm one of the few people that go to law school thinking I want to practice a certain type of law and actually end up doing that type of law. My goal was to go to law school and help farmers, and I was fortunate enough to find this law firm and brought in and have since taken over. But yeah, I've always been an agriculturist. It's always what I wanted to do, is help farmers.
So I know that you also write a lot in various trade publications on agriculture issues. I know that I specifically have seen some of your work as well. And so, I don't know, are you still writing, and what are some of the articles, things that you have been lately?
Yeah, so for probably 15 years, I've written a monthly column for what used to be the Ohio Farmer. It's now since transitioned to the Agriculturalist and online, but I'm still writing that and have done many articles for various farm groups, OSU Extension, Farm Bureaus, those sorts of things. And I hadn't mentioned this before, but in the next few weeks, I'm going to be joining Ohio State University officially in their agricultural law program, helping them do some publications and some outreach. So kind of coming full circle and going back to Ohio State.
That's great. That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. So our attention to today's topic, partnership agreements. I don't know about you, Robert, but I feel like, especially general partnerships, are ubiquitous in agriculture, ranging from small to even large operations. And so what are some of like the big issues that come across your desk when it comes to agriculture agreements?
Yeah, so many farms are organized as some kind of entity and agribusinesses and landholding entities. So we run into partnership agreements quite a bit. And when I say partnership agreements, I'm saying that broadly, as in LLC agreements, corporation agreements, kind of just entity agreements in general. But we use a lot of entities in our work to protect family farmland, to transition the farming operation to next generations, for liability protection for our operators. And the partnership agreements themselves are really key in that. Um, we run into, and I'm sure you run into, Carrie, entities that don't have any agreements or entities that are a bit inadequate, and it can cause real problems. And it can cause financial strain, family strains. And so what we try to do are to draft partnership agreements that accurately reflect what we're trying to accomplish, and as best we can kind of plan for contingencies down the road, issues down the road that might come up. So we've got a set of plans how to address future issues rather than just kind of walking into them blindly and potentially causing conflict.
So I'm sure that you had this issue before. I know that I have, about farms that don't have a partnership agreement at all. And I guess in sort of step one is that, why do you think it's important for farm operations who have, let's just say, some type of a partnership, whether it be a limited partnership or a general partnership, why that they should have an agreement in writing in the—
Yeah, so one thing I tell clients is, it's relatively easy getting into business. It's getting out of business that can be difficult. So what if we have a partnership and there's 3 or 4 people in it and somebody wants to leave? They don't want to do it anymore, or maybe they have health issues, want to retire, whatever. How do they get out? Well, if we don't have an agreement, we may have 3 or 4 different opinions on how that works. And some may say, well, you can't leave. And the other may say, you have to leave when you retire. What is the value of the ownership? How do we decide that? How, if we do buy out a partner, what are the purchase terms? When are the payments due? All this sort of thing. So, partner potentially leaves, and it may be an involuntary departure, such as death or, like I said, health issue, retirement issues. What happens when a partner leaves, and how do we deal with that? Some entities end up being dissolved by the court because there's not a good plan. Somebody wants to leave, somebody has to leave, and the court just says, okay, well, we're dissolving everything, we'll sell everything and split the money up. So the partnership agreements allow us to have that plan when somebody wants to leave, or when somebody passes away and we need to transfer it to the next generation. It identifies who can be owners in the next generation. How is voting done? There's just many, many different factors that need to go into these partnership agreements. And it's really why farmers and other business owners really ought to take some time and develop a good partnership agreement, work with an attorney to make sure that partnership agreement says what they think it says, and then also to review it occasionally to see if it needs updated.
Now, in terms of the choice of entity, why do you think a farm would choose a general partnership as opposed to, let's say, a limited liability company?
Yeah. So as far as I know, there's only one reason that a farm would organize as a general partnership. And just to back up a little bit, a general partnership does not offer the partners any liability protection. So if you're a partner in a partnership, you are fully liable for the other partner's actions. You're fully liable for any employee, partnership employee actions. So from a liability perspective, partnerships are not a good entity for that. Whereas LLCs, if you're the owner of an LLC, you are protected personally from the actions of other owners and from the actions of the LLC. So why would we ever be a partnership? Like I was saying, there's only one reason I know of, and through Farm Service Agency and farm program payments through USDA, larger farms, particularly larger grain farms, will tend to want to be partnerships because they are eligible for multiple Farm Service Agency payments, whereas a limited liability company or a corporation or any kind of entity that has limited partnership will only ever be eligible for one Farm Service Agency payment. So when I'm working with farmers, if it's a larger grain farm, we'll tend to organize as a partnership to make sure we maximize FSA payments. If it's a smaller grain farm or maybe just a livestock farm, then we'll almost always go with a limited liability company to get that liability protection.
Makes a lot of sense. So I'd like to walk through the partnership agreement process. Let's just say you and a client have decided for whatever reasons to go ahead and move forward with the general partnership. What's sort of your process in getting that initial draft to the client of the partnership agreement?
Yeah, so number one is, who are the partners? Who are going to be owners, and what are those initial ownership percentages going to be? Then next set of questions will involve management. Is everybody a manager, or do we have managers and non-managers? Does everybody have one vote? Is voting based on ownership? So really the management is what we talk about next. And with partnerships, LLCs, and to a lesser extent corporations, we've got a lot of flexibility. We can set these entities up really any way you want to from a management standpoint. The next part I typically talk about is ownership transfer restrictions. And for, I would say, majority of my clients, this is the most important part. And that is, who can be owners in this company? So let's say we set up let's say it's an LLC, and we set it up with mom, dad, son, and daughter as initial owners. Well, can any of mom and dad's grandchildren become owners? Can the children's spouses become owners? It's really important on these farm entities that we control who owners can be. Many times in-laws cannot be owners. And before ownership can go to an in-law, maybe mom and dad get to buy it back, and maybe it's bought out at a discount. Maybe it's bought out at over time. So to me, this is usually the most important part of the entity, because this is how we control how it stays in the family for future generations. If anybody can just sell their ownership to anybody else outside of the family or otherwise, we can have in-laws come in, and then we get deaths or divorces and people we don't even know in the company. We can get creditors, lawsuit judgments, just people we don't want into the LLC that aren't affiliated with the family at all. So seeing how tight we want to keep ownership, how close to the family we want to keep ownership is really important. And then a lot of times we'll finish up with, how do we undo this thing? What if somebody wants out? Can they voluntarily leave or not? If somebody leaves, how are they bought out? How is the company valued? What does it take to dissolve the company? What if 3 of the 4 owners don't want to continue? Does it take a 3/4 vote to dissolve the company, or is it unanimous? And then, of course, there's always amending the agreement. How many people does it take to amend the agreement? Some or all? But those are the biggest issues. There's many other smaller tangential issues we can get into, but those are the main things we cover. That's probably 90% of what goes into a effective partnership agreement.
So, how do you approach things with your clients? Do you represent one partner or are you representing the business entity?
Well, that is a great question, and it depends. Sometimes we will represent one family member, and maybe we'll evaluate the partnership on behalf of that family member and say, hey, we don't like this, we'd like to see these changes. I would say more commonly we're working on behalf of the entity and maybe some or all of the family members. Now that gets into the whole conflict of interest thing. Who am I representing? Who am I looking out for? And when we get into that situation, I always have that discussion with the client, have them sign a conflict waiver that where they understand, yeah, I'm really working for the company. Maybe I'm working for multiple people, but each individual always has the option to go get their own individual legal counsel to review the agreement with them and make sure it suits their needs. But it just depends. Typically, I'm working for the entity slash family altogether, but sometimes I will get asked by an individual family member to review an agreement for them. As the listeners and viewers are thinking about this, it does bring up a really good point. Make sure you know who your attorney is working for. Are they working for just you? Are they working for the entity? Are they working for multiple people that may have conflicts of interest with you? So it's important to know.
So, I'm curious, Robert. I'm a trained mediator and I'm even on some agriculture mediation panels. And there has been some discussion about using mediators with multi generational farm families with estate planning. Have you ever seen mediation used in this context with negotiating partnership agreements?
I can't say that I've seen it a lot. I think as attorneys, as we work with families, we kind of inherently are doing some mediation along the way. There's no reason it couldn't be used. I find mediation, arbitration usually happens when there's already a conflict. But there's no reason that if a family was kind of wanted to have some kind of entity agreement, but just had some issue they were kind of deadlocked on and needed some help, I'm all for a third party coming in and just helping communication, helping discuss, if nothing else. Some families just need somebody there to push and pull and make sure everybody has a say in it. So yeah, if any of the viewers or listeners are in that situation where they're a bit at a standstill and just can't get to that next step, yeah, think about having a third party come in and just help talk and listen and facilitate a bit.
Now, after you've given the draft of the partnership agreement to your client or clients, what have you seen have been some of the most important provisions that maybe people are negotiating back and forth on in that process?
Probably in-laws. So mom and dad, son and daughter set up a partnership, and mom and dad are a little less enthusiastic about the in-laws being owners, where son and daughter are like, our marriage is fine, you got nothing to worry about. Well, we've heard that story before, right? So I would say in-laws, and should they be or can they be owners in the business, probably is maybe, it's definitely one of the more delicate issues we have to address, but one of the more important and maybe one of the more controversial. And then I would say another part is, can somebody automatically leave the partnership? Say if we set up mom and dad, son and daughter and in a land LLC, and we say you can't leave unless somebody else buys you out, you can't voluntarily leave. that means they're stuck in there unless they can find another family member to buy them out. And that's really important because that means you just can't cash out anytime you want to. So sometimes we'll have a difference of opinion where maybe somebody says, well, if I don't want to be in this, I don't want to get stuck in here. And other people are like, yeah, but if you leave and we have to buy you out, that could put the farm in financial jeopardy. We can't allow that either. So that's some of that negotiation and mediation that might have to happen to find out a balance there, or at least find a solution to those legitimate concerns on both sides.
Yeah. Robert, in addition to agriculture law, I also do family law. So I am dealing with the divorces and the partnership agreement, there. And then also, to a much lesser extent, prenuptial agreements. I am surprised, but I do feel like in agriculture, there are not as many families that are getting prenuptial agreements to help talk about some of these issues dealing with the family farm business. What is your perspective there? From in your neck of the woods in Ohio, is it the same way that there are fewer farm families that are considering prenuptial agreements?
Yeah, I would say that's probably accurate. Probably see it a little less than we might expect. Based on, I'm sure you see the same thing in Illinois and everywhere else, that farmland's going up in value, farm balance sheets are getting bigger and bigger. So, these farms have a lot of value to them. So, yeah, we might expect to see more prenuptial agreements than we do. It's always that, talk about delicate issues. How do you bring up with your future spouse that you need a prenuptial agreement? What I tell young people is blame it on the lawyer. Tell them that, hey, I told you you need a prenuptial agreement. And if the spouse is going to get mad at future spouse is going to get mad at somebody, have them get mad at me. Or sometimes we'll have the parents or grandparents say, hey, if you want to come into the farm business, we're really going to need you to get a prenuptial agreement. So again, that it kind of helps that young person, well, usually it's young, say, hey, mom and dad made me, come to you, ask about a prenuptial agreement, or the lawyer says I need one. So that's kind of a way I try to help people out on approaching that topic. But yeah, they're very important. Anybody that's going to come into a family farm really ought to consider a prenuptial agreement. And some people will say they'll never get divorced. It happens. It can happen to people that's been married 40 years. So
yeah, agreed. I mean, I
Mhm.
just got a divorce file a few months ago with they were married for 40 years, right?
Yeah,
So it
yeah,
does happen. Well,
yeah.
before we wrap up, Robert, briefly, I wanted to talk about the dissolution and the buyouts there. What have you seen as ways partnership shares could be valued in the partnership agreement,
Mhm.
if somebody wants to buy somebody else's shares?
Yeah, so typically we just use the value of the assets. In my opinion, most farms are selling commodities. So, we don't have a lot of value in the name of the farm like we do a brand name of, McDonald's or General Motors or something. When you're selling commodities, I think you just use the value of the assets. So we'll get an appraisal on the land, the equipment, livestock, grain, whatever it is, and we just value the hard assets. That's the value of the company. And if you're a 20% owner, the value is then 20% of the appraisal price. Now, a lot of times we do incorporate a discount in the purchase price, one to give the other family members a better chance to buy it back and to cause less financial strain on the farming operation, and then also to make it a less attractive asset to creditors and lawsuit judgments. Because if maybe you only get 75 cents on the dollar for your ownership. A creditor may look for other assets other than the farm assets to go after. So
Yeah.
just appraisals, and then sometimes we'll add a discount.
So, but to press you on that, there are going to be some farm partnerships that don't actually own assets. Maybe they just have a bank account, and maybe the partners all come to table with their own land, right?
Mhm.
As their own farm equipment that they own in their individual name, and they just kind of share farm equipment. How do you handle valuing shares in that type of kind of like a holding company partnership?
Yeah, so if it's just a holding company, then it would just be the value of the bank account at a fixed date, whether that's January 1, the fiscal year, whatever date it is. But then maybe within that whole partnership agreement is if somebody owns equipment, if they leave the holding company entity, maybe they're obligated to sell their equipment to the other partners, so the partners aren't left without equipment, without livestock, without operating assets. So if we're dealing with multiple entities, a lot of times those agreements affect each other, and we'll have kind of buyouts reaching from one entity to the other, because usually the main goal is to continue a viable farming operation for as long as we've got family members wanting to continue that. And so we'll usually structure these agreements to benefit the continuing family members, oftentimes to somewhat of a detriment for the non-farming members. And that's why it's so important to know what the agreement says when you get into it, because someday if you become the non-farming partner, maybe you don't get paid 100% of the value. Maybe you get paid over 10 years. So that's why it's really important to know what these agreements say, know what you're getting into, because you never know which side of the deal you're going to be on.
All right, Robert, thank you so much for coming to the podcast today. Where can people find you? Do you have a website, contact information you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, easiest way would just be to go to our website. That is ohiofarmlaw.com. Ohio Farm Law is all one word.com. All the information's on there.
All right, great. Looking forward to another conversation. Thanks again, Robert.
Okay, thank you.